That kind of blew my mind. I'd never heard of such a thing. I really just thought of cider as the strongbow that I was drinking at the pub. But cider and perry, yeah, it's all still new. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be interested in cider made at that level and with that sort of ambition. So all of that sort of price point are actually starting to really struggle.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Adam Wells, an award-winning drinks writer, cider educator, and founder of Cider Review. He is also the author of Perry, a drinks guide and a lending voice in the cider world. We will be diving into cider trends and what makes a great cider and advice for cider makers looking to stand out. Let's get into it. Adam, thank you for joining the
Yeah.
show. If you can tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Adam Wells. I am a general drinks industry professional. I worked for about 10 years in wine. I've worked in spirits. I wrote about spirits for a long time. And for the last 5 years, I have been a cider communicator, I guess, mostly writing, mostly for a website that I founded called Cider-Review.com, which I think is kind of the largest long form article website for cider and perry now. And yeah, I talk about cider and perry. I even make a tiny bit of it now. And I've written a book called Perry, A Drinker's Guide.
So yeah, you have a deep and varied background in the world of cider writing, reviewing, educating, and a little bit of producing. You do a podcast. What got you into this journey of cider? Because you said you started in other spirits, right?
Yeah, so I guess actually it is partially those other things that got me into cider. Growing up where I did in Northwest England, the choice of drink was either not very good lager or not very good cider in most of my local pubs, and I turned out to prefer the not very good cider. So I was drinking kind of the macro brands, the Strongbows, and so on. And that was my pint at the pub, which was fine. And outside of that, I ended up unexpectedly joining the wine industry in 2013. And yeah, got really, really into wine and went down that rabbit hole. And then a few years along the line, like 2016, maybe 2017, the buyers at the wine company I worked for brought a cider into the range, which had been made in the champagne method. And that kind of blew my mind. I'd never heard of such a thing. I really just thought of cider as these pints of strongbow that I was drinking at the pub, or occasionally I'd see a bag in box in a pub, maybe if I went on holiday or to a kind of to certain of the kind of more real ale focused pubs near me, and sometimes it'd be all right, but more often than not it would be oxidized and I wouldn't think terribly much of it. And so I'd really never given cider any deeper thought, despite being heavily into wine and whiskey. But this champagne method cider was incredible, and it made me think, well, God, there must be this whole world that I'm totally ignorant of. And so I bought World's Best Ciders by Pete Brown and Bill Bradshaw, which I still think is just the best book on cider ever written. And so this whole world was opening up, but I thought, gosh, so much of this seems really familiar to me. It's just the same as I've been reading in all the wine textbooks and in the wine qualifications that I've been taking. Stuff about varieties and styles and terroir and different countries and regions. And so that gave me a whole bunch more questions. And I spent the next 3.5 years speaking to cider makers and trying to get answers. And I didn't really feel at all qualified to write anything about cider at the time because, I knew a lot about whiskey and wine, but I just didn't feel confident enough in my knowledge about cider to start writing about it. And then I guess get fast forward to 2020, and I thought, yeah, okay, I'm just about ready to start writing, but that means I'm going to have to stop writing for the whiskey website that I'm a weekly writer for. And I said that to my editors, and they said, well, do you want to do a cider column on the whiskey website? And I said, sure, that'll only confuse and annoy a few people. And so we started writing about cider on Saturdays, and it confused and annoyed a few people. But actually, it turned out that far more people were really, really keen to learn about this new drink that I felt just didn't get the column inches that it deserved. And yeah, so about a year and a half after that, I started Cider Review with James Finch, who had been writing about cider for longer than I had, and yeah, over the last sort of 4 years, during which James sadly has decided to stop editing and has moved on to do other things in cider, including his own fantastic cider brand, Chapel Cider. We've been joined by Barry Masterson, who's now co-editor and probably does more of the editing than me these days, and a huge host of other writers. So I'm really, really pleased with what Cider Reviews turned into. But yeah, as you said, during that time, I've also been lucky enough to get to do some podcasting with my friends Albert Johnson of Ross on Wye Cider and Perry Company, and my cousin Justin, who leads cider tastings and talks. So that's really fun. And I've had the amazing privilege of being able to go to these fantastic cider events all around the world, like CiderCon that we just had in Chicago, and Cider World in Frankfurt, one of my favorite times of the year, and places like San Sebastian, and just discover this unbelievable international culture of cider that exists all over the world, and that I think drinkers in a lot of countries aren't necessarily aware of, in the way that I barely realized that cider was made outside the UK, other than a little bit in France, until I kind of got into it and discovered that there's cider being made in dozens and dozens of countries now, and a lot of the countries have got a much longer history of it than we do here. So yeah, still learning and still absolutely delighted to be a part of the cider conversation.
You said you started in wine and whiskey. Those are two very, especially wine, very established, very high pedigree uh, industry, right? So I've spoken to other people that get into cider, and sometimes they compare it and say um, that the wine industry, it's a little gatekeep kept. Like it was a little harder to get in, but they discovered cider, and it was a growing industry. And like you said, you didn't see, you thought it was cider. It's just this thing that just not very sophisticated, not very just. Uh, it, but there's this world behind it with sophistication, and it's developing more and more now that I see throughout like the last past 2 3 years. Um, did that call you a little? Say like it's kind of like a new industry growing that I could get into, and it's not as you know old, and it's a lot of discovery, and it is developing well. Is that a little bit of a call compared to the wine, or am I reading into it?
Well, that's definitely an amazing thing. Yeah, you do have this sense when you write an article about cider, or especially Perry, that there's a good chance that you're writing an article that hasn't been written before, or
Yeah.
you're asking people questions that they've not necessarily thought of before. And so, yeah, especially when I started writing, it just felt like you're going through these fields of just fresh unpicked flowers, and just everything's new, and you're wide eyed, and just I don't know, the words kind of poured out of you. I think it's funny. It's actually a really cool and exciting time, I think, in the wine and spirits industries, because for a bunch of reasons, there are some scary things happening. It's not the easiest time for any of the industries at the moment. But also when I compare it to 11, 12 years ago when I first got into wine, some of the conversations that are happening now around things like agriculture and natural wine, and I suppose a lot of the kind of elements of gatekeeping that you alluded to, that these conversations weren't necessarily being had so much in 2012, 2013. And so I think that there are kind of exciting new discussions to be had in wine, and certainly in spirits. There's far more consideration of agriculture and provenance and things like that than there once was. So there's cool discussions right across the drinks industry. But cider and perry, yeah, it's all still new, and loads of us who are writing, we don't have a clue about so much of it. There is nobody, I would say, almost in cider, who is a proper global expert on cider, because maybe Darlene Hayes and maybe a couple of other people, but really the amount that there is to know and the difficulty in accruing knowledge and the degree of research that hasn't been done is just incomparable to something like whiskey or wine, where there's so much money poured into
Yeah.
research and so many people who are paid and interested in doing the research. In Cider, so much of what we're doing is made possible by people who are kind of volunteering their time and their knowledge and their expertise. So yeah, we're all on a learning curve, which is kind of scary sometimes, but it's definitely exciting to be a part of these fledgling conversations. And it's really exciting when you go to somewhere like CiderCon or CraftCon now in the UK, and there are all these talks and on topics that kind of blow your mind in a way at just the range of them and the depth of them. And somebody said at CiderCon to me that they come and they feel like their cup's being refilled, and I completely get what they mean by that, because there's just nowhere else in the world that you can go and have that exposure to things like the research and the conversations that are going on and be around 1,000 odd people who are interested in having the same in-depth discussions as you. So yeah, there's a wonderful kind of newness to so much of the discussion around cider, and it's really really exciting to see that there is this international interest. That there are people in Germany and France and Spain and America and Chile and Australia who are really fascinated to have these conversations and really fascinated to have them on an international level. So I don't think there's ever been a better time to be interested in cider. And I just hope, I really hope that momentum keeps going. This turned into a bit of a ramble, sorry.
We're good.
Because, there is definitely a little bit of a sense of energy running out slightly in the UK as far as kind of what I've come to call the aspirational end of cider, the kind of high juice, apple driven stuff is concerned.
Yeah, something that that I connected with what you're saying is that yes, those in other industries have like the one, just to keep using the same example, has been, there's families that be like, oh yeah, my great 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 grandpapa used to. It's been in my family for generations. We've been winemakers and but here there's just so much new. And what do you think of this? Big since it's a developing industry, people can find new ways of doing it and give them an edge. Like I just see some people that get like the past 2 years I've been involved in it. I see people saying like, yeah, we're finally gonna plant and grow cider apples and start creating cider just out of what's left over out of our orchard, and actually planting apples for our cider that are cider apples, and stuff like that. So my different question is, from your vantage point as a reviewer, industry insider, like, what are some of the biggest trends that you see at the moment that in the cider world are just kind of taking over, or giving people an edge, making them stand out?
Well, I guess I'm coming from a particular viewpoint. I'm interested in that kind of high juice, very, for want of a better term, wine influenced sector of cider, the places where people are using full juice. Maybe they're talking about their varieties, maybe they're talking about their orchards, maybe they're trying to do some interesting thing in terms of how they're making it, but it kind of comes back down to reverence for the apple. Now, I cannot begin to pretend that that's representative of the majority of cider made in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, if we're talking about trends, I'm probably a terrible person to ask, because the majority of cider made in the UK and probably around the world is cider that I don't spend a great deal of time gaining any great knowledge or expertise in. But if we're talking about this kind of full juice sector, where people are excited in the cider apples, as you say, and in learning about the flavors they can get from different varieties and methods of making, styles, all that sort of stuff. I've definitely, or even in just the 2 years that I've been going to CiderCon, the very small additional amount of time that I've spent interested in American cider industry. I've seen, as you say, this focus on named varieties. There's more and more producers who are interested in seeing what they can do with not just sort of, I guess, British and European and French cider apple varieties, but also in some of the amazing heirloom varieties in America, and also going and finding wilding trees that they can potentially graft and find an entirely new variety from. Which I think is going to be very, very important going forward. And I noted that a lot of people were talking about Fireblight at the conference, which is an important topic of conversation over here in the UK. So finding kind of varieties that are resistant to that and that might be the cider apples of the future is super important. But that's not that's not really a trend for now. Definitely in the UK over the last sort of 8 years, there's been a massive increase in the number of producers who do want to present their cider in that 750 ml wine bottle size and shape format. Again, that really represents a fraction of the market. The overwhelming majority of cider sold in the UK is draft, is made by the very, very big producers. It's carbonated, it's from concentrate, it's using for so. But the number of producers, as I say, who are, I guess, trying to increase high value perception, which is a good term of Gabe Cook's, or who are just looking to try and make something that can stand up in the company of any sort of well-made drink and say, this is something that's been made with reverence for the ingredient and the place it's been grown and the way the land has been farmed, and that we believe can sit on any dinner table and stands up to the quality of any other drink. The number of those ciders is just miles and miles beyond what it was even when I first got interested in cider, which really in the grand scheme of things is not all that long ago. 2016, 2017, it's not even a decade. So big changes there. But yeah, sorry, I don't know how good an answer that is to the question of trends, but yeah, those are just, I guess, a couple of things that have stood out to me.
Well, you've probably done many articles talking about specific cider companies and producers, and maybe in the past couple of years you've seen them come and go. Maybe that they didn't make it. So my next question would be, what do you think makes the difference between a new cider maker that makes it and doesn't make it? And maybe at part two of that question would be, in the UK specifically, what do people need to understand of the UK market when it comes to maybe selling their cider? Maybe they're in the US and they want to sell in the UK, or maybe they're just a new cider maker in the UK.
Well, there are two very different markets, I think. And the UK is a very specific market because so many of our cider makers, when we're talking about those kinds of ciders that they're using full juice and all that sort of thing, are under 7,000 liters because historically the duty laws here said that if you make less than 7,000 liters a year, you don't pay duty. And those laws are changing slightly, but not necessarily in an amazing way. But anyway, the point is that we have, in terms of full juice, high value perception, aspirational sorts of ciders, we are mainly very, very small producers. So actually, most people here in the UK who are making cider, it's not their whole livelihood. So, kind of, to be brutally honest, if we're talking about the people who make it and the people who have to call it a day, it can often be, well, how much time and energy do you have to devote to a small business when you're not able to expand it in terms of employee numbers, in terms of taking any pressure off you when you're doing all of this on top of probably holding down another job and maybe having a family. There's also, I think, the question of money and space. Like, the fortunately, key consideration if you're going to start a cidery making that sort of cider where, maybe if you're wild fermenting, it's going to take months to be ready and then might not be ready to sell for months after that. You need to have an enormous amount of available space. And so unless you're lucky enough to kind of have your own farm with your own barns, that's a big investment. And yeah, so we can talk about things like the marketing and communications, which are vitally important as well, of course. But definitely here in the UK, there is not a large number of high juice producers who are making that less than sort of 7,000 liters a year. There are a few, Ross on Y, Oliver's, Little Pomona. But then you get into the point that actually the UK market is a kind of red herring because it feels like, we're this long established cider culture and people over here really know what cider is. And so surely it's a great market for cider because we make and drink more than anywhere else. But then we come back to the fact that the majority of cider made in the UK is this from concentrate, low juice, dilute, fizzy stuff that you buy in pints at the pub, and it's about 5% alcohol. So that being available at every pub and in every supermarket means that the British public has a really fixed idea of what it thinks cider is.
Right.
And if you're saying to them, well, actually, it can also be this thing that you can package in 750 mils and you drink by the wine glass. And, it might be sparkling, but it might be, sparkling because of the champagne method, or it might be keeved, or it might be bone dry and still, or it might be bottle conditioned or whatever it is. Oh, and by the way, it starts at £10 a bottle, maybe going up to, in excess of £20 a bottle. There is just this kind of disbelief in this reaction of, oh, well, that's not, that's crazily expensive to cider, and trying to persuade people to take a punt on cider at that price is just something that's still like a real challenge to producers in the market. I was speaking to a couple of my very dear friends who make cider recently, and one in particular who makes, year on year some of my favorite ciders and the ciders that I consider to be the best in the world, and which from my context as somebody who's into wine and whiskey, these are ciders that stand up in qualitative terms with any drinks in existence. And he's talking about how hard they are to sell at what I consider to be a really, really low price, and how draft and 500 ml carbonated cider remain not only the bulk of his sales, but an increasing percentage of that bulk. So we had this moment during COVID and maybe up to 2020, late 2022, maybe 2023, where people were a lot more experimental and were trying all of these different sorts of ciders, these 750 ml packaged high juice, more aspirational ciders. But with what's happening in the world and certainly in the UK in terms of cost of living and all sorts of other things, that's falling away a little bit. And ciders made at that level and with that sort of ambition and packaged in that way and sold at that sort of price point are actually starting to really struggle. Ironically, at a time when there's never been more conversation and interest in the category.
Right.
So I've as with all my answers, I have rambled and possibly gone a little bit off topic, but I guess it's very difficult to say that there's just one thing that is the difference between sort of success and not having success in cider terms, because it's really hard for everyone in the UK market if you're making full juice aspirational cider. And really the massive crutch, or insofar as there's any kind of remedy and support, is the fact that cider makers seem to be a lot more joined up now than they were a few years ago. There's a lot more communication between producers. There's a lot more of a collegiate feel. We have events like CraftCon, like CiderCon, where people can hopefully realize that they're not alone. They can take lessons from other makers. They can pool knowledge and experience. And I really, really think that that has to be to the benefit of the category, and it's so necessary if this amazing aspirational cider movement's actually going to continue and thrive.
Yeah, like any business, right? It's if you can pay down your ignorance tax as fast as you can, you bring down your learning curve as fast as you can. I mean, that just you have to pay for it and wait less to be successful, right? So that's great. Um, and something that I would like to see a chart of, but just an idea. I would love to see how, in Canada where we are, the UK, as you're saying, in the US, more like the middle class is kind of disappearing, taking a big hit with everything, inflation, economy. I'd love to see if the products and just saying cider, the very, very cheap cider and very, very expensive cider are probably the ones that are still selling, and everything in between is kind of fallen to the wayside. I don't know,
Mm,
just a theory that I'm having right in a second, but I'd love to see if it's right. Um, Tasting, let's talk about tasting and reviewing cider, something that I'm not very familiar with.
sure.
What's your process when reviewing a cider? What are you looking for? How do you evaluate
Well, so I guess my tasting system, if you can call it a system, it is very much based on the Wine and Spirits Education Trust's systematic approach. And here we're talking about if I'm writing a note for cider review, or I'm doing something in a judging capacity, as as far as kind of just regularly drinking is concerned, I don't do anything formal. But if I'm for whatever reason evaluating a cider, yeah, it's based on the kind of wine industry's education bodies kind of systematic approach to tasting. So it's trying to strip away my own kind of personal preferences and biases insofar as that's ever actually possible, and just go through every point of the drink from looking at it to finishing it. So and this is what the Pamelier, the certified Pamelier course, that the American Cider Association based its own evaluation system on. So, it starts with what we're looking at, and it's, is it clear? Is it cloudy? Is it sparkling? Is it still? What color is it? And how deep is that color? So, really basic stuff. And then, it's the nose. It's how intense is it? Can I kind of smell it from the far side of the room as soon as the bottle's open, or do I really need to get my nose into the glass? So we're talking about the intensity of the aromatics there, and then there'll be characteristics, and obviously here, it becomes difficult because my like citrus and kind of gooseberry might be somebody else's completely different aroma based on the foodstuffs that they've kind of grown up around. And actually there is a lot of discussion in the wine industry belatedly that we have built our sort of tasting wheels and our descriptors very much around an Anglo-European set of flavors, and that actually
it?
we
Right.
probably want to expand that flavor palette so as to make it a lot more accessible and inclusive internationally. And anyway, so I'll be trying to get these different aroma characteristics, but also looking for the information that I get from them. So, rather than just here's a random shopping list of fruit flavors, it's, well, are these flavors, is it a really youthful fruit? So if it's a really young cider and it hasn't been in any oak, we're expecting like really fresh notes.
Mm.
They're probably not going to start being in the kind of dried fruit direction. There probably won't be those kind of barrely notes of like spices and vanillas or what have you. But if it's an older cider, then we expect to see some development. So it's trying to show with that aroma note that we're not just listing as many different flavors as we know, but that there's some like information to be drawn from there based on like the method that the cider might have been made by. So, traditional method cider, we're expecting some lees impact. We're looking for some saline flavors, maybe some toast, some dough, some biscuits, some brioche, that kind of stuff. And then yeah, palate. So we taste the cider, and there are all the considerations that that aren't so much flavors as they are sensations and structures. Is it high acid or is it low acid? Is it full bodied? Is it light bodied? Does it have tannin? If so, how much tannin? Are they thin, really, really astringent tannins? Maybe because it's a really young cider, maybe made from more tannic apples, or does it have lots of tannins, but they're quite integrated because it's maybe an older cider, it's maybe been in barrels. So again, it's kind of getting all of this information. And then flavors. And quite often, if you're doing, here's a top hack for your Pamelier exam to people who are doing it, literally just write down the same notes that you put for aroma, because 90% of the time they're if they're not all there, then they're going to be really, really similar. But maybe it is a really different flavor to the nose. And if so, why is that? Why would that be? Sometimes the older ciders, they or the ciders that might be made in a particular method, they will really differ from nose to mouth. And then, of course, we're looking for any flaws and faults. So, is it vinegary because of acetic acid? Does it have mouse? Whatever it might be, TCA, corked. Is it ethyl acetate? It smells like glue. What are the flavors and aromas that we think shouldn't be there? And in very rare cases, are they flavors and aromas that actually should be there because it's part of the style? So, for instance, Asturian and Basque ciders that inherently contain a degree of acetic acid, because that's literally that's part of the PGO. So we do all of that, and then we've got all of this information, and so we come to our conclusions. So do we think this is a very good cider, or do we think this is an okay cider? And we're basing all that on all the information that we've already had. So, normally if it's just me and I'm opening a glass to enjoy myself or with friends, we don't need to do all of that prior information. It's just I like it, I don't like it, and maybe I've got a few thoughts. But if we do the systematic approach, the idea is that we're evaluating a cider's quality based on every single facet of it from nose to tail, and hopefully describing it in a way that we could to anyone at any level of knowledge or experience, but also in language that has been made available to everyone who has done these sort of systematic approach evaluations.
Yeah, as you're talking, and I hear all of that. To me, with the unsophisticated, I don't really drink or anything, so it almost sounds like you're creating a story to me.
Well,
And
yeah, I mean, I guess so. And I take a little bit of I feel that everyone is too harsh on themselves. Literally, everyone says, "Oh, I can't do that. I have an unsophisticated palate." But we pretty much all of us are going to be eating it a couple of times a day, right? We're all exposed to these different aromas, these different flavors, and we all have things we like and things we don't like. And that's basically all of what tasting a cider is. It's why do I like this? Why do I not like this? And yeah, as you say, it is a little bit telling a story, but it's really just coming to some conclusions on your opinion of a cider with all of the kind of in inverted commas evidence that you have to have. But it's really beyond, I guess, the opportunity to taste enough ciders that you build up this mental library of flavors you've tasted before and styles you've tasted before, and being able to recognize this apple variety or that production method. It's really nothing that isn't very, very easy to learn or teach yourself or get used to. And that's kind of the reason that this system has been designed. It's designed to be a really easy way to like evaluate a cider or a wine or a whatever for yourself. But no, I mean, we've all got palates, we've all got preferences and opinions, and that's really the basis of every single tasting note. So I think there's a degree to which that sort of thing has long been gate kept, and I really just don't think it should be or needs to be.
right, yeah. We got 5 minutes left. We could. How about this? If you could only drink one cider or perry for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Well, uh, the rest of my life, it's got to be a style that almost isn't too heavy and that's like versatile enough for like um, you know, all the time, anytime. I mean, I'm on a record as saying that my all-time favorite cider is Queen Mab by Eden Ciders, and I stand by that being possibly the best cider I've ever tried. But it's so rich and so sweet. It's this ice cider, so it's a really specific style. And I mean, I could, no way could I drink that all the
Couldn't crack
time.
one of those open in the morning and have.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, it would probably be a dry cider. It would probably have to be not too tannic or not too high acid, so it's something that you can drink all the time. I do like lots of people aren't so fond of a bit of oat, but I quite like it. And I this is going to seem like shameless sucking up to the people who know, but probably the cider that I drink more of, and that gun to my head, I'd drink over any other, for more often than not, will probably be Ross on Wise Raison d'Etre, which is their flagship cider. It's a blend of two different bittersweet apples, Dabinet and Biscay, and it's always aged for 2 years before release, and it gets even better for years and years after that. And it's always aged partially in oak, and I just think it's unbelievably complex and unbelievably delicious. But it's actually, despite the fact that it sounds like it would be this huge, immense, intense drink, it's something that, yeah, I could and have drunk an awful lot of. Yes, I think that would probably be my desert island cider.
Okay, 2 minutes or less. What's exciting in the world, in your world? Uh, where can people find you? What's happening? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm still promoting my book at the moment, which is called Perry, a Drinker's Guide, and that's available on all the obvious online channels. And if you're in the UK listening to this, it's also available through my publisher, Camera Books. I'm probably going to be starting my cider review writing again soon this year. I've made a bit of a slow start, but I always kind of get my wind in March or so. So yeah, please come to cider-review.com, because we publish articles there every week, and there's such a talented group of writers contributing. It's certainly not just me by any means. And I'm also really looking forward to CraftCon, which is the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association's annual conference of aspirational cider in the UK. It's the only dedicated craft cider conference in the UK, and it's an amazing event. And I'm extra pleased because I don't have to speak at it this year. I just get to enjoy the talks being given by everybody else. So yeah, definitely recommend that people book their tickets for that if they're over in the UK.
Adam Wells, thank you very much. Um, I learned a little bit, so I hope people that are listening learned some as well. Any final thoughts you'd like to hit before we close off?
No, I think that's it from me. Just thanks so much for having me on, and for everything that you do for Cider and Perry.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam.
Bye now.